In Baltimore, a container ship the length of 3 football fields passes under a bridge that has carried commuters since 1977. 3 days later, it will destroy it. March 26, 2024, 1:24 in the morning. At the base of the bridge, 3 Maryland Transportation Authority police officers get a call. A ship has lost its steering, and it is heading straight for them. 90 seconds later, they do not have a bridge left to hold traffic on. 6 construction workers were on that bridge, filling potholes in the middle of the night. All 6 of them died. For 2 years, the story was simple. A ship lost power. A bridge fell down. It was a tragic accident. Then, in the summer of 2026, federal prosecutors stood up and said it wasn't just an accident at all. You're watching Black Box Breakdown. Prosecutors say this wasn't just an accident. Chapter 1. The bridge that was never supposed to be hit. The Francis Scott Key Bridge opened on March 23, 1977. It existed for one reason. Baltimore's harbor tunnel had run out of room. Planners looked at building a second tunnel. It priced out higher than a 4-lane bridge across the water, so they built the bridge instead, finishing construction in 1977 at a reported cost of around $141 million. It became the final link in Baltimore's Beltway, and it became the only route across the harbor legally open to trucks carrying hazardous materials. Both tunnels banned them outright. By 2023, more than 12 million vehicles a year were crossing it, generating $56 million in tolls for the state of Maryland. That same year, the Port of Baltimore at Fed became the #1 port in the entire United States for automobiles and farm machinery, 52 million tons of cargo, worth roughly $80 billion. That port supported around 15,000 jobs directly and close to 140,000 jobs in the wider economy around it. All of it depended on ships being able to reach open water under a bridge that was never supposed to be in their way. The bridge itself was what engineers call fracture critical. It had no backup. If one key support failed, there was nothing built into the design to stop the whole structure from coming down with it. It was protected by concrete piers called dolphins, wrapped in timber, built to 1970s specifications. In 1980, a vessel struck one. The fendering held and stopped it. That near miss was treated as proof the system worked. When the piers were repaired, they were rebuilt to the exact same 1970s standard. Nobody upgraded them. Here is why that mattered so much. On May 9, 1980, a sudden squall knocked out the radar on a phosphate freighter called the Summit Venture in Tampa Bay, Florida. Blind, the freighter struck a support column of the old Sunshine Skyway Bridge. 1,200 feet of it came down. 35 people died, 26 of them on a Greyhound bus that plunged with 6 vehicles into the bay below. That disaster is the real reason the shipping and engineering industries finally wrote a formal standard, in 1991, for testing whether a bridge could survive being struck by a modern ship. The Key Bridge was already 14 years old by then. It was never required to be tested against a standard written to prevent the exact kind of disaster that was about to happen to it anyway. After the 2024 collapse, the National Transportation Safety Board ran the numbers on the Key Bridge anyway. What they found was not close. The bridge's calculated risk of collapse from a ship strike was nearly 30 times higher than what today's engineers consider acceptable, and the state of Maryland had never once run that calculation on its own bridge. It gets worse. The same investigators identified 68 other American bridges in 19 states built the same way before the same standard existed. Most of them have never been assessed either. Chapter 2. The ship. The MV Dali, 947 feet long, built in South Korea in 2014 at the Hyundai Heavy Industries Yard in Ulsan and delivered to its first owner in March of 2015. For its first year at sea, it belonged to a Greek shipping company under different management entirely. That changed in October of 2016. The ship was sold to a Singapore company called Grace Ocean and placed under the technical management of another Singapore company, Synergy Marine. It was reflagged to Singapore and stayed under that same ownership through the night of the collapse. The Dali did not belong to Maersk, the shipping giant whose containers it was carrying. Maersk was only the charterer, a customer renting cargo space on someone else's ship, with no role in operating it. This was not the ship's first accident. In July of 2016, while leaving port in Antwerp, Belgium, in good weather, it struck a berth wall while unmooring. The stern was damaged. No one was hurt. Nothing spilled. Investigators pointed to error on the bridge. By 2024, the Dali had been boarded for port inspections at least 27 times since entering service. Twice, inspectors found something wrong. Both times it was a minor deficiency, fixed before the ship sailed. It was never once detained. The most recent deficiency, found in June of 2023 at a port call in Chile, was a faulty fuel pressure monitoring gauge. It would not be the last time fuel pressure on this ship mattered. The US Coast Guard itself inspected the Dali in September of 2023. It found nothing wrong at all. Separately, Singapore's own Maritime and Port Authority later confirmed the ship's statutory certificates were valid and that it had cooperated fully with the Coast Guard's investigation. On paper, this was a normal ship, with a normal ownership structure that looked fine every single time anyone actually checked. Just after 1 a.m. on March 26, 2024, the Dali left the port of Baltimore, bound for Colombo, Sri Lanka. A 27-day voyage. Roughly 4,700 containers on board, dozens of them carrying cargo classified as hazardous. It never made it out of the harbour. Chapter 3. 4 minutes and 9 seconds. Everything that happened next comes from the Dali's own voyage data recorder, the ship's version of a black box. Federal investigators reconstructed it down to the second. 1:24 in the morning. The recorder shows the Dali holding a true heading of 141 degrees, moving at about 8 knots. Nothing unusual. Then, at 1:24:59, the ship's electrical system automatically switches power sources, and the alarms start. 1:25 and 0 seconds. The Dali is 0.6 of a mile from the bridge when the lights go out completely. A single wire inside the ship's main electrical switchboard had come loose. Not from damage, from how it was installed in the first place. The wire had a label wrapped around it, a heat-shrunk plastic sleeve identifying which circuit it belonged to. That label was wrapped too far down the wire. It covered the metal collar that was supposed to lock into the terminal block underneath it. It never fully seated, and for who knows how long, it sat there, vibrating loose a little more with every mile the ship sailed. Investigators later noted that routine infrared inspection could have caught it. Nobody had run one. That night, the wire finally let go. When it disconnected, a breaker tripped that it was never supposed to trip. Steering pumps died. The main engine shut down 8 seconds later. Most of the ship's lights went dark. 58 seconds later, low voltage power comes back on. The crew has restored some control, but the ship is still coasting, dead in the water, drifting toward the bridge. 1:25:59. The senior harbour pilot picks up the phone and calls the pilot's shoreside dispatcher. 7 seconds. He says the ship has lost steering, it's headed for the key bridge, and someone needs to close it. Right now. This call, not a radio broadcast, not an alarm, a 7-second phone call, is the single action that federal investigators would later credit with preventing an even greater loss of life that night. 1:26:13. The pilot orders the rudder hard to port, trying to steer the dead ship away from the pier. 1:26:39. They call for a tugboat, the Eric McAllister. It's 3 miles away. It will not get there in time. 1:27 and 2 seconds. With the bridge less than 2 ship lengths away, the senior pilot gives one more order: drop the anchor. He would later tell investigators he knew it would not stop the ship. He hoped, at best, it might nudge the bow a few degrees off course. It was the only card he had left to play, and he knew it. 2 seconds later, at 1:27 and 4 seconds, the ship loses power again. A second blackout. A completely different cause than the first. 2 of the ship's 4 generators were being fed fuel through a pump that was never designed to run them continuously. When the fuel pressure dropped, the system disconnected both generators and blacked out the entire vessel a second time. Remember that detail. A fuel pump doing a job it wasn't built for. It will come up again, in a federal courtroom 2 years from now. 1:27:11. the pilot orders a radio call to warn other ships in the water. At 1:27:25, it goes out over the marine radio, a security call, a safety warning, not a distress signal. There was no Mayday broadcast before the bridge came down. 1:27:36. Power comes back a second time, 93 seconds before impact. At 1:27:46, the pilot orders the bow thruster to full power, hoping it can still swing the bow. It cannot. The ship is moving too fast for it to have any real effect. 1:28:10. The bow finally drifts out of the shipping channel and begins grounding in the mud of the riverbed. It does not matter anymore. The ship has no room left to recover. 1:28:21. On the bridge itself, Maryland Transportation Authority police officers, already stationed at both ends that night for an unrelated road project, get the word and act immediately. Hold all traffic on the Key Bridge. There's a ship approaching that just lost their steering. So until they get that under control, we got to stop all traffic. Real words from a real radio call at roughly 1:27 that morning. 1:28:22. Both ends of the bridge are closed to vehicles, 48 seconds before impact. 1:28:59. 10 seconds before the ship reaches the bridge, the anchor chain is finally heard running out on the recorder. It is far too late to matter. 1:29:09. The Dali's bow strikes Pier 17. 6 seconds later, span 18 begins to fall. Then the pier itself gives way. Then span 20. Then 21. Then 22. With a bridge inspector's own vehicle still sitting on top of it. Total time, from the very first blackout to the moment of impact, 4 minutes and 9 seconds. Chapter 4. Reopening a harbour that was completely sealed shut. Within hours, the mission on the water changed from search and rescue to recovery. But there was a second, much bigger problem forming underneath the surface. Thousands of tons of steel truss now sat across the bottom of one of the busiest shipping channels on the East Coast. The port of Baltimore, the country's #1 port for automobiles, was completely sealed. More than 50 salvage divers went into that water. 12 cranes were brought in to start cutting the wreckage into pieces small enough to lift out. 6 heavy lift crane barges worked the site, including the Chesapeake 1000, the largest crane barge on the entire East Coast, nearly 200 feet long, capable of lifting 1,000 tons in a single pull. The first goal was never reopening the bridge. It was smaller than that, just cutting one path back into the harbour, wide enough for something, anything, to get through. On April 5th, 2024, President Biden flew over the wreckage by helicopter, then came down to meet the responders working it. "Your nation has your back," he told them. By the end of that same month, engineers had cut a temporary channel 280 feet wide. By the end of May, almost exactly 2 months after the collapse, the full, permanent shipping channel, 700 feet wide and 50 feet deep, was open again. The port came back to life in about 2 months. The bridge itself would take years. And the deeper question, not how to clear the water, but why any of this happened at all, would take even longer than that. Chapter 5. The 48 seconds that didn't reach everyone. The same fast thinking that stopped vehicle traffic 48 seconds before impact never reached everyone who was actually on the bridge that night. A 7-person paving crew from Brawner Builders was out that night, filling potholes. An 8th man, a state bridge inspector working for a separate contractor, was walking the span doing his own inspection. They had their own radio channel, separate from the police, separate from the ship, separate from everything moving on the water below them. On that channel, in the minutes before the collapse, there was exactly one relevant exchange. One worker asked what was going on. Another answered, "They're just holding traffic because a ship lost its steering, that's all." The bridge collapsed less than 30 seconds later. No evacuation order ever went out on that channel. The federal investigation would later state it plainly. The lack of effective, immediate communication to the highway workers was itself a contributing cause of the 6 deaths that followed, alongside the bridge's own structural vulnerability. Within hours, Governor Wes Moore stood in front of cameras and declared a state of emergency. "We are thankful for the brave men and women who are carrying out efforts to rescue those involved," he said, "and pray for everyone's safety." One man on the span that night Road Inspector Damon Davis was walking its length when the ship struck. He ran. He reached the nearest surviving section of deck just as the rest of the bridge gave way beneath his own car. A crew member named Moises Diaz had been scheduled for that same overnight shift. A last-minute change may have kept him off the section that fell. He has since called the 6 men who died people he saw as family. The 6 men who did not make it off in time were not just names on an incident report. They had lives in this city that the bridge's collapse cut off in the middle of an ordinary work night. Jose Minor Lopez, 37 years old, born in Comitán, Guatemala. He lived in Dundalk, Maryland, and left behind a wife and 4 children. Alejandro Hernandez Fuentes, 35, from Mexico, living in Baltimore, married, with 4 young children of his own. Dorian Roniel Castillo Cabrera, 26, from Guatemala, also living in Dundalk. Mayna Yesenia Suazo Sandoval, 38, from Azacualpa, Honduras. He was a father of 2, a teenage son and a 6-year-old daughter. Carlos Daniel Hernandez Estrella, 24 years old, born in Michoacán, Mexico. Miguel Angel Luna Gonzalez, 49, from El Salvador, living in Glen Burnie, Maryland, a father of 6. 4 countries, 6 men. Between them, they left behind wives, husbands, and more than a dozen children. One crew member, Julio Cervantes, fell into the river and swam to shore, despite reportedly not knowing how to swim. He is one of only 2 men on that bridge who made it off alive. 1 year later, on the anniversary, Governor Moore returned to the water's edge. "We also remember the heroes," he said. "In that moment, we showed what it means to be Maryland tough and Baltimore strong." Chapter 6. What the investigation actually found. March 20th, 2025. Almost a year before the final report, NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy calls an urgent press conference of her own, because the risk was too serious to wait for. "We need action," she said. "Public safety depends on it." Her point, if Maryland had run the vulnerability assessment, it never ran, she said plainly. The collapse could have been prevented. 8 months later, on November 18th, 2025, the board released its full final report, 259 pages. Homendy opened that meeting with a line that stuck with reporters in the room. "The fact is," she said, "we shouldn't be here today. This tragedy should have never occurred." She had her own way of explaining just how hard it was to find one loose wire on a ship that size. "The Dali is almost 1,000 feet, and it's as long as the Eiffel Tower," she said. "Locating a single wire that is loose among thousands of wires is like looking for a loose bolt in the Eiffel Tower." She also asked, on the record, why, a year and a half after the collapse, Synergy still hadn't updated its own policies to tell its crews to stop relying on that backup fuel pump. The board's official conclusion, in writing: the probable cause was a loss of electrical power due to a loose signal wire connection, caused by improperly installed wire label banding that cost the Dali its propulsion and steering close to the bridge. The board went further. It found that the lack of any real protection against a ship strike contributed to the bridge's collapse, and that the lack of fast communication to the road crew contributed to the loss of life. One mechanical fault, one design gap from decades earlier, one communication failure in the final minute, 3 separate causes, all named in the same official finding. The physical damage, $18 million to the ship itself, between $4.3 and $5.2 billion to rebuild the bridge. The bridge is not expected to reopen until the end of 2030. More than 34,000 vehicles a day are still being permanently rerouted around a harbour that used to carry them straight across. And the 68 other American bridges the board flagged as similarly untested? As of this recording, most of them still haven't been assessed. That is the settled part of this story. The wire, the design gap, the communication failure. A federal agency spent 20 months proving exactly what went wrong and published every page of it for anyone to read. What that report could not settle, because it was never its job to settle, was who, if anyone, should be held criminally responsible for it. Chapter 7. The Case. May 12th, 2026, 2 years and 7 weeks after the collapse. Federal officials gather for a press conference aboard a ship docked in southeast Baltimore, with the wreckage of the bridge visible in the water behind them. There, the United States Department of Justice unseals an 18-count federal indictment. Named Synergy Marine, the company that technically managed the Dali, a related firm, Synergy Maritime, and one individual, a technical superintendent named Radhakrishnan Karthik Nair. To be clear about what this is, an indictment is an accusation brought by prosecutors. Nothing in it has been proven in court. Mr. Nair has pleaded nothing because he has never once appeared in an American courtroom. The charges: conspiracy to defraud the United States, causing the deaths of 6 construction workers, failing to warn the Coast Guard of a known hazard, obstructing the federal investigation, lying to investigators. The 2 Synergy companies face something else too: misdemeanor environmental charges for allegedly discharging containers, oil, and bridge debris into the Patapsco River. The Environmental Protection Agency's administrator put it bluntly: no foreign company should profit by poisoning American communities. At the center of the criminal case is that detail from earlier, the fuel pump. Prosecutors allege that since at least 2020, as a cost-cutting measure, Synergy had modified the Dali and its sister ships to feed 2 of its 4 generators through an unapproved flushing pump instead of the proper fuel supply system. That pump, prosecutors say, could not automatically restart itself after a blackout. And that, they allege, is exactly why the second power loss turned fatal. The ship simply ran out of time to recover before it reached the bridge. Prosecutors further allege that Mr. Nair personally told federal investigators he didn't know the flushing pump was being used that way. They say that statement was false. And they allege that Synergy employees fabricated Coast Guard safety paperwork to keep the modification hidden from the one agency whose entire job was to catch it before it sailed. The indictment puts the total economic loss at, quote, at least $5 billion. Under federal fraud statutes, that number could theoretically expose the defendants to fines twice that size. Nobody has been ordered to pay anything. Not yet. As for Mr. Nair himself, he is believed to be in India. He has not been arrested. He is not out on bail because he was never in custody to begin with. Prosecutors have said there is, quote, no concrete progress bringing him to Baltimore. By July of 2026, Synergy's own defense attorneys were asking the court to sever Nair from the trial entirely, arguing it's genuinely uncertain he will ever set foot in an American courtroom to face it. A month after the main indictment, in June 2026, a 4th man was charged separately, the Dali's chief engineer, Karthikeyan Dinadayalan, who, unlike Nair, had stayed in the United States since the night of the collapse. He was charged by a simpler filing than a grand jury indictment, a legal signal that often points toward a negotiated resolution, not a fight in court. Synergy's own public response was sharp. It said DOJ was, quote, criminalizing a tragic accident, arguing the charges are inconsistent with NTSB's own finding that the blackout made the outcome effectively unavoidable once it began. A senior Justice Department official called the collapse, quote, a preventable tragedy of enormous consequence. Governor Moore's own reaction was direct. We welcome today's indictments, he said, and remain committed to ensuring that all those responsible are held to account. If it goes to trial, that trial is scheduled to run from October through November of 2027, 3.5 years after the bridge came down. Chapter 8. Everyone else who paid for this. The criminal case is not the only track moving through the courts. On the very same day the indictment was unsealed, Maryland's Attorney General announced something else entirely. A $2.25 billion civil settlement between the state of Maryland and the ship's owner and operator. More than 50 times the roughly $44 million those companies had originally tried to cap their total liability at under a maritime law dating back to 1851. That is a civil payment to the state. It is a completely separate track from the criminal charges, and separate again from what happened with the victims' families. In late May of 2026, Synergy and Grace Ocean reached confidential settlements with the families of all 6 workers and with survivor Julio Cervantes. The amounts were never made public. The family's attorney called the outcome, quote, bittersweet. Because, he said, they won't have the opportunity to experience the seasons of life with their husbands, fathers, brothers, and sons. Those same settlements caused a separate federal civil trial over the city of Baltimore's own economic losses, to be paused just days before it was set to begin. Some of those remaining claims may run into a nearly 100-year-old Supreme Court precedent that limits who can sue for pure economic loss at sea. It still has not been resolved. But it was never just the state or the city that paid for this. For 2 years, the loss of that bridge reached into ordinary businesses that had nothing to do with any of it. Bull's Trucking Company watched its volume drop from as many as 4,000 trucks a day to 0 overnight. Other haulers rerouted through the harbour tunnels or around the Beltway. The American Trucking Association's estimated 4,900 trucks a day, carrying $28 billion a year in goods, suddenly needed a different way through. One local trucker, Robert Lovett, ended up taking a $25,000 federal disaster loan just to keep his company running. Down on the water, the crab houses felt it too. "We're not getting enough crabs," said Stacey Guzman, who owns Chris Seafood, as Gulf prices spiked $34 a box that same week. Costa's Inn, a crab house that has been open since the bridge was first being built in the 1970s, a place that once fed the very steelworkers who put the bridge up, stayed open anyway and turned down a disaster loan. The people who built it and the people who fed the people who built it both outlasted the bridge itself. The replacement being built now is Maryland's first cable-stayed highway bridge, 2 towers over 600 feet tall, a main span held up by 144 steel cables. This time, its piers are being driven as 276 concrete-filled steel columns, 8 feet across, built to the modern vessel collision standard the original bridge never had to meet. But even this project has not gone smoothly. In April of 2026, the state terminated its main contractor's agreement for the bridge's second phase after its cost proposal blew past the state's own $5 billion estimate. As of the most recent reporting, no replacement contractor for that phase has been publicly named. Current target for reopening, the end of 2030. On the 2-year anniversary, Governor Moore said it plainly, "I plan on being the governor who cut the ribbon to reopen the Francis Scott Key Bridge." The wire that started all of this probably cost a few dollars. The plastic label wrapped around it cost even less. The bridge won't reopen for years. The criminal trial hasn't started. Federal investigators have gone as far as asking the entire global shipping industry to rewrite its own safety rulebook because of what happened here. A recommendation, not yet an answer. And 68 other bridges, across 19 states, are still sitting there, unassessed, exactly the way the Key Bridge was on March 25th, 2024. Somewhere tonight, on one of those 68 bridges, cars are crossing over water on a structure nobody has ever actually tested against a ship exactly like the Dali. That is not a theory. That is the federal government's own list. If a single wire wrapped the wrong way brought down an American bridge, wait until you see what a single mislabeled light did to a nuclear reactor control room in Pennsylvania. And if you want more real investigations like this one, subscribe to Black Box Breakdown.
If this one got under your skin a little, good. That's the point. And it only keeps happening because people like you keep showing up.
So do one thing for me. Hit subscribe. It is free, and it is the whole reason Black Box can keep taking these disasters apart.